The Great Wall of China, one of humanity's most iconic structures, a monument to human determination and engineering prowess that winds across mountains and valleys for thousands of miles. For centuries, it has stood as a symbol of China's ancient civilization and defensive might. But what if I told you that a section of this legendary structure lies hidden beneath the waters of a vast reservoir, that you can actually dive underwater and swim through ancient watchtowers built during the Ming Dynasty? That the dragon-like wall that once guarded China's northern borders now serves as an artificial reef, hosting fish instead of soldiers? This is the story of the underwater Great Wall, a unique section of one of the world's most famous landmarks that was deliberately flooded in 1977, creating one of the most extraordinary dive sites on Earth. The section we're talking about is located approximately 160 kilometers northeast of Beijing, in Hebei province. It's part of what was historically known as the Panjiakou and Zaifinka passes, two strategically critical fortifications along the Great Wall. These weren't minor outposts. They were major defensive positions, considered among the 32 most important passes constructed during the Ming Dynasty. To understand why these sections are underwater, we need to go back to the 1970s. In 1976, a devastating earthquake struck near Tangshan, not far from Beijing. The quake measured 7.8 on the Richter scale and killed hundreds of thousands of people. The infrastructure damage was catastrophic, including significant harm to water supply systems serving China's capital. In response, the Chinese government launched an ambitious project called the Luan River Project, which translates roughly to leading water from the Luan River to Tianjin. The plan was to dam the Luan River, creating a massive reservoir that would provide reliable drinking water and hydroelectric power to the region. The reservoir would be called Panjiakou, though it's sometimes referred to as Panlong Lake, meaning Dragon Coiling Lake. There was just one problem. The planned reservoir would flood a valley that contained a 7.3-kilometer stretch of the Great Wall, including the historically significant Panjiakou and Zaifinka passes. The government faced a difficult decision. The water was desperately needed. The earthquake had shown how vulnerable the region's infrastructure was. But flooding the Great Wall meant submerging a piece of China's most treasured heritage. In the end, practicality won. The project moved forward. Villages in the valley were evacuated, their buildings demolished. Some smaller structures and artifacts were relocated to higher ground. But the Great Wall itself, those massive stone fortifications that had stood for over 500 years, were deemed too large and too expensive to move. They would be left in place, to be swallowed by the rising waters of the new reservoir. Imagine being one of the villagers forced to leave. Your family had lived in this valley for generations, farming the land, fishing the river, living in the shadow of the ancient wall. You'd grown up seeing those watchtowers on the ridgelines, walking along sections of the wall, knowing it connected you to centuries of Chinese history. And now you were told to pack your belongings, that your home and your ancestral land would soon be underwater. In 1977, the dam was completed and the waters began to rise. Day by day, the reservoir filled. The villages disappeared first, their demolished remains covered by the advancing water. Then the valley floor, the fields where families had farmed for countless years. The river that had flowed through the valley for millennia became indistinguishable from the lake that now replaced it. And then the wall began to submerge. The lower sections went first, the stones that had stood on relatively flat ground. As the water rose higher, more and more of the wall disappeared beneath the surface. Watchtowers that had commanded views across the valley found themselves surrounded by water. Archways through which soldiers once marched became passages for fish. When the reservoir reached its full capacity, the transformation was complete. The 7.3-kilometer section of wall now lay underwater, buried under depths ranging from just a few meters in some places to over 30 meters in others. Above the surface, you could still see where the wall emerged on the mountainsides on either side of the reservoir. The stone dragon appearing to dive into the water on one shore, swim across underwater, and emerge on the opposite bank. The evacuated villagers were relocated to higher ground on the mountainsides surrounding the reservoir. Unable to farm the land that now lay underwater, many turned to fish farming, raising carp, grass carp, and silver carp in cages suspended in the reservoir. One family, whose ancestral home had been at the bottom of the flooded valley, established a floating restaurant and small hotel at the precise spot where the wall plunges into the lake. From their floating deck, guests can look down and know that beneath them lie the remnants of their family's history. For years, the underwater wall was largely forgotten. It was a curiosity, something locals knew about but few people actually saw. The water was murky, cold, and deep. Diving technology in China wasn't widely available to recreational divers. The site remained an unexplored secret, visible on sonar but unseen by human eyes. Then, in the early 2000s, adventurous divers began to explore what lay beneath the reservoir surface. What they found was extraordinary. The wall hadn't merely survived its submersion. It had been preserved in remarkable condition. The stone construction, built to last centuries on land, proved equally durable underwater. The watchtowers, beacon towers, and defensive structures remained largely intact. But the underwater environment had added new dimensions. The wall and its towers had become colonized by freshwater organisms. A layer of silt, sometimes as thick as 5 meters, covered the lower portions, but the structures themselves protruded above this sediment. Small freshwater fish darted among the stones. Benthic shrimp, unique to the reservoir ecosystem, made homes in the crevices where soldiers once stood guard. The diving conditions are challenging. This is not a tropical reef dive with crystal clear warm water. The Panjiakou Reservoir is a cold, dark environment. Even in summer, at depths of just 7 meters, the water temperature hovers around 10 to 11 degrees Celsius. Dive deeper to 20 meters, and it plummets to just 3 to 5 degrees. Divers must wear dry suits and use cold water regulators to avoid hypothermia and equipment failure. Visibility is poor. In summer, algal blooms cloud the water, reducing visibility to just 3 meters at shallow depths. At 20 meters, where some of the most impressive structures lie, there's virtually no natural light penetration. Divers must use powerful torches to see anything, and even then, the view extends only 5 to 6 meters. It's like a perpetual night dive, except you're swimming through ancient Chinese fortifications instead of coral reefs. The dive profile is technical. The maximum depths reach 25 to 27 meters, pushing the limits of recreational diving. The cold temperatures, poor visibility, and complex environment of swimming through architectural structures demand experience. Dive operators typically require divers to have completed at least 100 to 200 dives before attempting the underwater wall. This isn't a place for beginners, but for those qualified and willing to brave the conditions. The experience is unlike anything else on Earth. As one diver described it, the Great Wall is the only wonder of the world that you can actually dive. You descend through the murky water, torch in hand, not entirely sure what you'll encounter. Then, emerging from the gloom, you see it, a wall of precisely fitted stones, each block cut and placed by craftsmen 500 years ago. An archway, rare on the Great Wall, allowing you to swim through rather than over the fortification. These archways are particularly special. They were rarely built on the wall because they represented defensive weaknesses. An enemy could potentially force their way through an archway more easily than they could scale a solid wall. The fact that they exist at Panjiakou makes the dive even more unique. You can propel yourself through these gaps, following the same path that defenders might have used to move between defensive positions, except now you're floating rather than walking. The experience is profoundly surreal. Outside the water, you can see the wall climbing the mountainsides, exactly as it appears in countless photographs and tourist visits. But here, floating beside it in 3-degree water, everything is transformed. The wall that normally inspires thoughts of ancient battles and imperial power now evokes different feelings. There's an element of melancholy, knowing that human decisions led to its submersion. But there's also wonder at how it endures, how the stonework remains intact, how this monument to the past has adapted to its new aquatic existence. The ecological transformation has been unexpected and fascinating. Marine biologists studying the reservoir have found that the submerged structures function as artificial reefs. The complex surfaces of the stones provide habitat for algae and microorganisms. These, in turn, attract small fish and invertebrates. Larger fish come to feed on the smaller ones. A complete ecosystem has developed around the wall, with the ancient stones serving as the foundation. This has led to discussions about formally designating the underwater wall sections as protected artificial reef zones. The same structures built to keep people out are now sheltering aquatic life. The cages of farmed fish suspended near the wall add another dimension, though they also create hazards for divers who must be careful not to become tangled in the nets. Below the wall, even deeper in the reservoir, lie more remnants of the pre-flood valley. There's a submerged village, its demolished buildings and streets still traceable underwater. There's a train bridge that once carried rail traffic through the valley. These artifacts of more recent history rest alongside the ancient fortifications, creating layers of temporal archaeology. Exploring these deeper, more dangerous sites requires technical diving skills beyond what most recreational divers possess. The depths involved, the cold, and the zero visibility make it genuinely hazardous. As one dive operator put it, the village is at yikes diving depth. But for technical divers willing to push the limits, there's a whole underwater landscape waiting to be explored and documented. What do you think it must be like to descend to those depths? To see not just the wall, but the remains of entire communities. To know that families lived in those submerged houses, that trains crossed that underwater bridge, that all of it was sacrificed for the reservoir that now covers it. The underwater wall is impressive, but it's just the most visible part of a much larger story of transformation and loss. The creation of the Panjiakou Reservoir raises complex questions about heritage preservation versus practical needs. The water was desperately needed. The earthquake had demonstrated the vulnerability of existing infrastructure. Millions of people depended on reliable water supplies. Against those needs, even preserving a section of the Great Wall seemed secondary. Yet looking back, some wonder if alternatives existed. Could the dam have been located differently? Could portions of the wall have been relocated rather than left in place? Would modern preservation techniques have handled the situation differently? These questions don't have easy answers. The decision-makers in the 1970s worked with the technology, knowledge, and resources available at that time. What's undeniable is that the flooding created something unique. There are many places to see the Great Wall in China. Tourists flock to restored sections near Beijing like Beideling and Mixianyu. Adventurous travelers seek out wild, unrestored sections. But there's only one place where you can dive through it, where the wall exists in an entirely different element, where ancient stones now shelter fish instead of soldiers. The site has become a pilgrimage destination for divers around the world. Operators like Scuba take approximately 50 divers per year to Panjiakou, a small number that helps preserve the site from overvisitation. The journey requires commitment. It's a 3-hour drive from Beijing, hauling heavy scuba equipment. The conditions are harsh. The dives are challenging, but those who make the trip speak of it as a transformative experience. Unlike any other dive they've done, the contrast is striking. Above water, the Panjiakou Reservoir area has become scenic tourism destination. Visitors take boat tours, admiring the view of the wall emerging from and disappearing into the water. The landscape combines elements of northern Chinese mountain scenery with the water features more typical of southern China. It's beautiful in a conventional way, but beneath the surface exists this hidden world. The same tourists looking at the picturesque scene above have no idea what lies below. The watchtowers standing in the depths, the archways through the wall, the ecosystem that has developed around the ancient stones, the submerged village and bridge waiting in the deeper, colder darkness. The preservation of the underwater wall depends largely on the stable, cold environment of the reservoir. Unlike coastal underwater sites subject to storms, currents, and salinity changes, the reservoir provides relatively consistent conditions. The cold water slows biological degradation. The freshwater environment avoids the corrosion issues that affect structures in the ocean. The depth protects most of the wall from wave action during storms. However, the site isn't entirely stable. Water levels in the reservoir fluctuate with seasonal patterns and drought conditions. During severe droughts, the water level can drop significantly, exposing portions of the wall that are normally submerged. This creates opportunities for above-water inspection and photography, but it also exposes the stones to air, sun, and temperature variations that can accelerate weathering. Climate change adds uncertainty to the site's future. Changing precipitation patterns could affect reservoir levels. Extended droughts might leave portions permanently exposed, while excessive rainfall could deepen the submersion. There are no comprehensive preservation plans specifically for the underwater wall sections. Unlike the heavily restored sections near Beijing that receive constant maintenance and protection, the submerged portions are largely left to natural preservation. This hands-off approach has worked reasonably well so far, but it offers no guarantees for the future. Some archaeologists have proposed systematic documentation of the entire underwater section, creating detailed three-dimensional maps and photographic records. This would preserve knowledge of the site, even if physical conditions deteriorated. Advanced sonar and photogrammetry could capture details impossible to see in the murky water with human eyes. Autonomous underwater vehicles could explore the deepest sections without risking human divers. But such projects require funding, expertise, and governmental support. The underwater wall isn't a priority in the same way that major tourist sites are. It generates little revenue. Few people can access it. Its preservation competes with numerous other heritage sites across China for limited conservation resources. Yet the site's significance extends beyond China. The Great Wall is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized globally as having outstanding universal value. The underwater sections are part of that heritage. Even if they're inaccessible to most people, their preservation matters to the international community, not just to China. The story of the underwater wall also resonates with modern concerns about infrastructure, development, and heritage. Around the world, development projects face similar dilemmas. Dams flood archaeological sites. Roads cut through historic landscapes. Urban expansion consumes ancient settlements. The question of how to balance present needs against preservation of the past remains as relevant as ever. In some ways, the creation of the underwater wall was a sacrifice that ensured the wall's survival in a different form. Had the reservoir not been built, would those sections still stand today? Or would they have deteriorated through lack of maintenance, been vandalized, or been damaged in other ways? The cold, dark waters have protected the stones in ways that exposure to air and human activity might not have. For the villagers who were displaced, the reservoir created hardship, but also new opportunities. Fish farming has proven economically viable for many families. The tourism industry, both above and below water, has brought revenue to the area. The floating restaurants and hotels cater to visitors attracted by the unique landscape. Some descendants of the displaced families have found ways to thrive in the transformed environment. The underwater wall serves as a reminder that the Great Wall was never a single, static structure. It was built and rebuilt over centuries, adapted by different dynasties, modified to meet changing defensive needs. Sections fell into ruin and were restored. Parts were demolished or buried. The wall has always been in flux, always transforming. Its submersion is just another transformation, dramatic but not unprecedented. The wall that was built to divide land now divides water from water, the surface world from the submerged world. Soldiers once walked its length, watching for threats from the north. Now divers swim its length, exploring a frontier as challenging as any the ancient defenders faced. Swimming through those underwater archways, surrounded by 500-year-old stones in 3-degree water, divers connect with history in a visceral way. The cold is real. The stones are real. The achievement of building this massive fortification is real. The decision to flood it was real. All of it exists simultaneously in that underwater moment. The Great Wall of China remains one of humanity's most impressive constructions, whether you're walking its length on a mountainside or diving through its watchtowers in a reservoir. The underwater sections don't diminish its grandeur. If anything, they add another layer to its story, demonstrating how even the mightiest human works must eventually adapt to forces beyond our control. As long as the Panjiakou Reservoir exists, this section of the Great Wall will remain submerged, hosting fish and divers rather than soldiers and tourists. It's a unique chapter in the wall's long history, a reminder that monuments transform, that the past takes unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most extraordinary experiences of history require us to go beneath the surface, into the cold and the dark, to discover what lies hidden below.